Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy, I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers. Kevin J. Hulburt is an assistant teaching professor of English at Pennsylvania State University and holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in curriculum and supervision. His research focuses on the pedagogical choices of an experienced mindfulness and compassion teacher within the context of an intervention for educators. Working from a socio-cultural learning theory perspective, he is interested in how mindfulness and compassion-based practices are learned and how they can impact educational practices, including those of teachers and teacher educators. His co-authored article, The Calm, Clear, and Kind Educator, a contemplative educational approach to teacher professional identity development, was published in Advances in Research on Teaching in 2020. And this is my conversation with Kevin.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You're good.
So what are you working on now and what motivated the project?
Currently I'm working on two projects that are pretty different from each other. One is a book that I'm co-authoring on the affordances of teaching poetry at the 6th through 12th grade reading levels, grade levels. And the second project is a mindfulness training in a retreat format for undergraduate students. And that is more of what I consider traditional research, where we are looking at outcomes related to well-being, wellness, as well as potentially academic outcomes.
And what have you learned about yourself through the scholarly writing process or the research process?
This was an interesting question, and I kind of debated how honestly to answer it. I think my answer would be that I learned that I am a practitioner and an educator first and a researcher second. That my primary interest is in supporting educators and teaching myself, and that research is a vehicle for bringing intentionality to that, but it's not really what drives my passion, what really makes me want to do the work. So the research is incredibly important. But to me, the outcomes and the opportunities to engage with learners is the real value, or what I enjoy the most.
What's the role or responsibility of scholarly writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why do scholarship? Why write?
Like I said, I think so. I work primarily in education and teacher education, and then mindfulness in education. And in both of those contexts, research is about intentionality. It's about taking a look at a particular piece of the puzzle, pulling it out and examining it to make certain claims about it or to better understand what's happening there, and then to put it back into the praxis of what's really happening in a classroom. And so the value of research, I think that the challenge of that is when you pull a part of the equation out to look at under the microscope, you are taking it a bit out of the context that it was found in. And so there's a risk that you can overgeneralize or misgeneralize the information that we draw from the research. But that said, on the other side, when we do bring research into the equation, we bring intentionality to our practice, and we learn a lot about the artistry of teaching as well as the skills and the technical aspects of teaching.
When you're struggling in the research or the writing process for whatever reason, what strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
I mean, there's going to be days where you don't feel it. There's going to be days where you have no interest whatsoever in writing. And I think in those days, what I would try to do is get up early and start early and tell myself that I only had to write for 20 minutes. And what would often happen is then I'd write for 2 hours because you just get into the flow of the thing. But that allowance to say, okay, 20 minutes would be enough. And any forward progress is forward progress. So anytime we move the ball down the field, I guess to mix metaphors, but the idea being that some days it really will just be 20 minutes, and that can be okay because you still were showed up and participated in the process. And other days that flow state takes over and it just feels wonderful. And then the other thing that I would say that I did a lot and I do a lot is collaborate. So with the book on poetry that I'm writing, I have a co-author who's also a good friend, and I love the collaborative space that gets created. And sometimes when I'm not feeling fully motivated, she'll be the source of motivation, and vice versa as well. And that is amazing when you have that opportunity to collaborate with a team or a partner who brings, their energy to the table as well.
Wonderful. I really like that point about collaboration, because so often I think there is this kind of misconception that writing occurs in a vacuum, but really so much of it depends on that collective, that support system that we have around us that says, this is working, this isn't working, outside of ourselves, and to really kind of give us that inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And there's a dance there, right? There's I don't know what you mean by that. Can you explain your idea further? And then suddenly you're on the hook to re-articulate, and what ends up happening is you end up saying it better, and you find a better way to express the idea you were seeking, because if you can't explain it to your writing partner, you're probably not going to be able to explain it to a wider audience. So there's a kind of a holding each other accountable in that space too, I think.
What is your favorite part of the writing or the research process, and why?
So I mentioned I think I'm a practitioner first in the project, the mindfulness project that we're working on now. We are hoping to offer a spring break retreat for undergraduate students, collaborating with the Inward Bound Mindfulness. So I be me, and they bring a curriculum that's been researched in the past and is well established with professional teachers, mindfulness teachers coming to present that to undergraduates, and we would go to a location off campus for several days and have days of mindfulness practice. And in that process, we'll be gathering the research of pre and post testing, and as well as 6 months later returning for further testing, and we'll get qualitative interviews as well as quantitative data primarily through surveys. My favorite part of that process is the actual retreat itself, is the watching people engage with the practices and seeing their experiences firsthand, because that's what made me interested in that field in the first place. And it's where the rubber hits the road. It's where things get really interesting. And then trying to capture enough of that we can analyze as data is the challenge, I think. But what I enjoy the most is the actual practice when it's taking place.
So when you go into the retreat setting, is there some sort of specific activity that you find really successful that you do with this population that you find rewarding and satisfying?
Yeah, I'd say two things. So the structure of this retreat is several days in length, and the majority of time is spent in silent, independent practice. So sitting in silence on a cushion, or sitting in silence and doing walking meditation, or mindful movement, which is kind of a yoga-based practice. In those three categories, in some ways, you're not seeing a lot going on. You're in fact seeing very, very little, and you just have to trust that as young people engage with those practices, there's a lot of internal work going on. And I have been doing this work for over 15 years now, and worked with retreats for over 15 years. And I'm confident to say that a lot of times that inner work is happening, even though we don't have a way of kind of accessing it. And then there are small group conversations where they process their experiences within the mindfulness practices. And they also engage in a kind of social mindfulness practice where they speak with each other in very intentional ways. There's a series of steps to developing those conversations so that they can come with a kind of curiosity to get to know each other, to ask real questions about their own lives or about each other's lives. And in those conversations, as the retreat progresses, there's a deepening of that conversation that comes from all of the silent practice that they're accumulating over the course of the week. You see a lot more listening, a lot more attention to each other. And it's really hard to capture that within a research context. To bring cameras would be intrusive to that space. To record the conversations would be intrusive to that space. It's intended to be a conversation of that group. And so there's not an easy way, honestly, to draw conclusions outwards for an audience. We have to kind of rely on secondary measures of interviews after the fact. But when you're in that room and you're seeing, young people from 18 to 20 engage with each other authentically, and the impacts that can have, which is often emotional, it's unquestionable, the impact that it's having for a number of the participants.
What kind of things are they reporting? So how are they taking these practices, these activities, and these strategies out beyond this retreat space and into their own lives?
Yeah, that's interesting too. So over the course of that 15 years, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of young people who came on retreat starting at like age 14 or 16 and continued to come back year after year. And so that's the only kind of real source of data that I have on how it's changing their lives or how it's impacting their lives over time, because they come back and talk about what that's like. And it's hard to say, because when we talk about the ages of 16 to 22, so much growth is happening and so much thinking about their place in the world and what they're supposed to be doing with their lives is occurring. So it's hard to say like what this retreat does or how the impact that this retreat has on that. In the reporting from the participants, it's had a profound effect. What they talk about is that it's a kind of a foundation or a place that they can go to. A refuge is the term that we tend to use, that they can go to when they need it, to find that kind of calmness, to find a sense of peace within themselves, to return to themselves and get into touch with how they're feeling and what's happening for them throughout the year. And then when they come back on retreat again and reconnect with this community, they feel a powerful sense of connection. And often they say, and this is again not research based but more anecdotal, but often it's pretty common that they talk about how that community in the summer is a deeper way of connecting with their peers than they tend to see in their school systems or in their home lives, where it may be less easy to connect on those deeper levels and have real authentic conversations with their peers.
What revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own work, and why? What sort of problems or challenges do these activities help you solve? And it seems like a lot of the work that you're doing now is very study based and survey based. So I imagine there's a lot of challenges with this too.
I write a lot through dictation. I use a dictation system to talk into a microphone, and I will do that on a treadmill or I will do that at my desk. I don't know why. I just find it freeing to get a first draft out. And I allow myself to accept that writing as a to paraphrase, I think it's Anne Lamott, a crappy first draft, and allow that to be okay. That my job is to get it out onto the page and to start to organize the information in some sort of coherent fashion. And then it's a series of revisions to, once that draft is out, it's a series of revisions to improve that draft and make it speak more directly to the ideas that I want to get across and to that audience that I have in mind.
I really like that idea of multiple drafts. I think often when we go into revision, or at least when we set up in terms of workshop in an academic setting, you have such limited time that we only do that revision process maybe once, maybe twice if we're lucky. And I think that that's probably the one of the things that's the most difficult to communicate to students, is that revision is more than just one draft beyond the original.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes against everything that they've been taught. The majority of their educational system, their educational experience, at least the way that I think of it, is that the majority of their educational experience is assignments that are one and done. You study for a test, you take the test, you're done with that chapter, you start the next chapter. There's very few assignments where you complete it, you step away, and then you return to it and change it, and especially in any kind of fundamental way. So the idea of editing makes sense to them, where it's like, all right, I'm going to fine tune, I'm going to look for misspelled words, I'm going to look for comma splices throughout a draft. That is sellable. That's kind of reasonable within their schema of what happens in school. But the idea of real revisions where an entire chapter could go away or large paragraphs could be added or subtracted, that's not normal in most classes. And so I think we're up against that a lot as teachers of writing, where we have to introduce that and then make the case that that's what writers do, but they don't experience writers. I mean, very few of them have direct experience with people who write professionally, so they're not seeing that and they're not getting it in other courses. So it's a real challenge, I think, to kind of push against the norms of what they've experienced, to say your draft is done, awesome, that let's celebrate that. In fact, let's take a day off from writing, and then come back to it the next day with a totally different mindset of removing, cutting, and adding large sections and allowing that to be okay. And one strategy that I have there for myself and for my students is to introduce the idea of a graveyard, where it's at the bottom of a document and you can cut stuff that's not going to fit or might not fit and throw it in the graveyard. And sometimes things get resurrected, and you might pull things out of the ground and say, actually, this does have a place. But oftentimes the graveyard is eventually going to be deleted, and that's okay, because students have a hard time letting go of a page of writing that's their work, and it's hard to kind of introduce them to the realities of revisions, which are, 40 pages of work can be cut at times.
What reading suggestions do you have? So what scholars or creative writers or authors of any kind do you keep in your back pocket?
So I'd shared two that are kind of current on my list right now, because I'm preparing for a course on pursuits of happiness at Penn State, and two of the texts that influenced me there that I include in the course in one way or another. The first is Dan Harris's 10% Happier, which is a great introduction to mindfulness, written by someone who is pretty skeptical of the whole idea at first. And so he's coming with a lot of, he was a reporter who experienced a panic attack on the air. And as a result of that, had to seek ways of kind of dealing with his anxiety, and he stumbled upon mindfulness through that way of kind of his personal pathway. And then also as a reporter, he was researching and speaking to folks in the mindfulness field. And so he comes from like the skeptical reporter perspective, and I think he does a great job of exploring mindfulness honestly and pointing out some of the challenges to the field, if you will. And so it's a great book, and it's a great read. And the other is Laurie Santos, who is at Yale, and she developed a course on happiness that was an inspiration for me in the curricular development for the course that I'm teaching at Penn State. Is a wonderful course, and in fact, she's released the entire video series and the entire course online, I think through Coursera, which was a gracious thing, I think, to do. It's, I think, the most popular course at Yale. And what she brings is a lot of psychology studies in particular that point to interesting aspects of how our minds work and the kind of cognitive errors that our brain can make that can lead us astray as we're designing a life for ourselves. And by bringing those studies to her students, and I've drawn pages from her book numerous times, because they make a kind of powerful statement to our students to question some of the assumptions that they may have about how they're going to achieve happiness in their lives. And so that she's always a go-to for me when she has a podcast, when there's new episodes there, when she has new texts that she's written. I like to check them out.
Wonderful. Thank you for that reading list. I can't wait to check all of them out. Thank you for hanging out with me. I had a wonderful time and I've learned so much.
Thanks, Amy.